I think as a viewer watching this thing, and knowing that it, is adapted from a stage play, so it really doesn't have a million locations to begin with, having that constraint of the space, it really makes you focus on the acting and the talent even more so. I think it's a great opportunity for talent, but how does that translate into cinematography? I mean, that has got to be a challenge for you, knowing that you're really not going to leave this room for a very, very long time. You need to keep it interesting. You need to make it captivating. And yes, a lot of that interest, is on the shoulders of the actors, but a lot of it is on you too. So how do you deal with that unique challenge?
I know, I thought it was a lot of it on the visuals to keep it interesting and everything, and that was definitely something that we talked about in prep and how we'd be keeping it alive. But George had this explanation to me saying, like, think of this basement as a boxing ring. Think of these four characters being in their own corners, and he actually put in 4 posts in each corner that kind of symbolized the corners of a boxing ring. And he says, think of them like coming at each other, but instead of fighting with gloves, they're fighting with words. And this is how I'm going to choreograph it. And that to me was like, okay, he's going to move the actors. He's going to, there's going to be a dance with the actors like a boxing fight. And George, as he had a complete clear vision about that kind of choreography between the actors with the monologue that they had. He's the kind of director, he came in every single morning, an hour before anyone came in. For example, in this basement, there was so much about choreography of the actors and the dialogue that he sat in this basement in the mornings. I usually come an hour early just to get my head around what I'm going to do that day. He was there before me, just sitting in this room. He didn't want to be interrupted by anyone. And he just visualized every day what those scenes are going to be like and what the blocking is going to be like. And then he brought the actors in and, they performed in the rehearsals, and it just became so clear. Like anything that I had doubt about became clear when these actors came on set. Yeah. They performed, the way he moved these actors around. It became very clear suddenly, like the camera has to be here. The camera needs to be at this place. When Chadwick Boseman, talks about the most emotional part of this movie, right? He just happens to come at the right place. George had placed that camera. We had it on a dolly. We had it on a slider. We could slightly move in and come in close up. And it just became alive. It didn't become. It was. I was really scared at the beginning. Like we had 14 days. It was a short shoot altogether. We had 30 days to shoot this movie, but. We were like 13 or 14 days of the movie was in this basement, and it was the last 3 weeks. And I'm going like, how am I going to go to work every day in this small space? I'm going to go crazy. But it never felt that way. It never felt for one moment that I was trapped in this room. It was inspiring every single time because every scene was so emotional and came so alive with the actors that it never felt stale. And, there was also, it's interesting because, at the beginning I thought, how am I going to change the lighting in this room to keep it, interesting. But, George was very adamant. He wanted to feel Chicago to be just hot all the time, hot and sweltering, and you can't escape the heat. You can't escape the sun. So, that's how we ended up actually putting a small little window in this basement room just to feel like the heat and the sun coming in.
That's an interesting choice too. And earlier on, you had mentioned that was something you added in. It wasn't originally going to have a window, this basement space. I love having that window. I think for me, and you see this whenever anybody's tackling. Actually, I was just talking to Queen's Gambit production designer yesterday, and there was a discussion about like how are you creating underground spaces. And sometimes the only way you really even get it is if you have a little sliver of the real world outside. I think that window really helped ground this space.
Yeah. Well, I was interested because it really was written at the beginning as a space that had nothing to the outside. And, in a way, George explained it to us as like the underbelly of a slave ship that they just can't get anywhere out. And it only became like, I felt like, obviously for me, it was like, oh my God, if I could just have a little window or something of daylight coming in that I could justify lighting, so it's not just one light bulb in the room, right? And, Mark Wicker, the production designer, was very much on my side, but, you also don't want to change the story. You also don't want to go to director and say, like visually it would be more interesting when the story was really about them being trapped in this room and no escape. So I kind of had gone like, I'm going with the no window. I'm just going with the story, and it's going to be difficult. But we ended up going to a scout where the production designer just wanted us to see the texture of the walls and the floors that he was going to be. I mean, that basement was built on a stage. Actually, it was like an old mill in Pittsburgh. And the one thing we used was like it had an old brick floor. So when you see the floor of the basement, it's actually the real actual floor.
Oh, wow.
And he built around this because it was so beautiful. And but he wanted us to see the texture of this. We went to an old factory, and he wanted us to see the texture of the walls and brick. And we walked into this one room where it had this tiny little window on top. The sun came through perfectly. It hit us, and it just looked a bit like, maybe reference later the Caravaggio paintings.
Yes. Exactly.
In terms of how that light came in and how the walls got dark, and it all became about this person. And it was like, you can't reach it because it's up too high. There's bars in front of the window, but it feels like there's an outsider. And, once we saw it, it was actually, George turned around and goes, you know what? I see what they can give us, right? And I can see how they can actually enhance the story more than we thought at the beginning. And so we ended up putting this, but it was, I lit this space with a 2x3 window. That was it, right? Yeah. That's my one big light source. And, at one point I thought I could change the daylight coming in, the sun can be behind the building. But once I started playing with this a little bit in prep and everything, I felt like, wow, it's going to take away from the story. The story is that it's so hot all the time. The sun is in there. They can't escape. It's even at the end when Levy comes in and he's pacing the room and he's breaking the one door that had a little bit of light in there, and he's coming into this old, I don't know what it was, a shaft that had, it's 4 walls and a skylight, right? Nowhere to escape from. That I felt like I didn't want to really change the lighting that drastically, because it still had to feel like a place that was just so hot and sweltering that you can't escape. So I kept it because it was also like the one thing that we felt is like, and I have this philosophy, anyways, like the camera shouldn't take over, the visuals shouldn't take over the story. You don't want to ever distract anything with the camera or with lighting from the story, because as soon as the audience starts looking and, wow, the lighting is so beautiful, or the camera is so interesting, it's like you're not thinking about what the actors are saying, and you're not thinking, and in some movies they're more visual and it works great, and in this movie, it was very important not to do this.